Not welcome here. The words hung in the air as the luxury hotel manager stared down at Marianne, her simple gray sweatshirt and baseball cap, a stark contrast to the Grand Meridian's opulence. She'd spent the day serving others, only to be treated like an intruder. But when Franklin Lawrence walked through those ornate doors minutes later, the manager's face transformed from contempt to horror. He'd just made the biggest mistake of his career. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow through the wrought iron gates of the Grand Meridian Hotel. Crystal chandeliers sparkled in the lobby, illuminating marble floors so polished they reflected the designer suits and cocktail dresses of the elite guests. Marianne Lawrence pushed her baseball cap higher on her forehead, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. At 43, she carried herself with quiet confidence despite her simple attire, a comfortable gray sweatshirt, worn jeans, and practical sneakers. Her hands, slightly reddened from hours of work, adjusted the strap of her canvas tote bag. She'd spent the entire day at the community center, organizing food donations and helping prepare meals for families in need. It had been fulfilling but exhausting, leaving no time to change before meeting Franklin. As Marianne stepped through the grand entrance, the contrast was immediate. Well-dressed guests mingled in the opulent lobby, while staff in immaculate uniforms moved efficiently between them. Several heads turned, eyebrows raised at her casual appearance. "The Grand Meridian welcomes you," announced an elegant sign, though the stairs suggested otherwise. A young receptionist caught her eye, then quickly looked away, whispering something to her colleague. Marianne noticed a security guard shift his position slightly, watching her with poorly disguised suspicion. She straightened her shoulders and walked toward the concierge desk. "I'm here to meet my husband," she explained to the woman behind the counter. "He should be arriving for the social reform conference." The concierge's smile remained fixed, her eyes moving from Marianne's cap to her casual clothes. "And your husband's name would be—" Before Marianne could answer, a voice cut through the ambient chatter. "Excuse me." The words were polite, but the tone was anything but. Marianne turned to face a man in his late 40s with immaculately styled silver-streaked hair and a bespoke navy suit. His name tag identified him as Elliot Winchester, hotel manager. "May I help you?" His smile didn't reach his eyes, which were busy assessing her appearance. "I'm just waiting for my husband," Marianne explained. "He should be arriving shortly for—" "I see." Elliot's interruption was smooth but deliberate. "And does your husband have a reservation with us?" The subtle emphasis on husband made Marianne's cheeks warm. She'd encountered this before, the assumption that someone like her couldn't possibly be connected to the type of person who belonged in a place like this. "Yes," she replied simply. "He does." Elliot's smile tightened. "Perhaps I could help you find a more appropriate place to wait." "I'm perfectly comfortable waiting here, thank you," Marianne replied, her voice steady despite the flush creeping up her neck. Elliot Winchester's posture stiffened. He glanced around the lobby, clearly concerned about the image she projected in his carefully curated environment. "Ma'am, the Grand Meridian has standards we must maintain." His voice lowered to a controlled whisper. "We're hosting distinguished guests today. Perhaps you don't realize the nature of our establishment." Marianne had encountered this attitude before, the polite veneer barely concealing condescension. After 20 years of public life alongside Franklin, she recognized it instantly. "I'm well aware of what kind of hotel this is, Mr. Winchester." A well-dressed couple nearby glanced over, then quickly away, pretending not to listen. "Then you'll understand why I must insist." Elliot gestured toward the door, his expression hardening. "There's a lovely cafe across the street where you might be more comfortable." Two junior staff members hovered uncertainly nearby. One, an older woman with kind eyes, seemed to recognize Marianne, her expression shifting to concern. The other, a young man, stared at his shoes, clearly uncomfortable with the situation unfolding. "I'm staying right here," Marianne stated firmly. "My husband specifically asked me to meet him in the lobby." Elliot's professional mask slipped slightly. "Look, I don't know what you're trying to pull, but this isn't going to work. We have security protocols, especially with today's event." "I'm not pulling anything." "Nevertheless, I must insist." His voice rose slightly. "Either provide proof you're a registered guest, or I'll have to ask you to leave." By now, several guests had stopped pretending not to notice. A small cluster of staff gathered near the front desk, watching with varying degrees of discomfort. The older female employee stepped forward slightly, then hesitated when Elliot shot her a warning glance. "Mr. Winchester," Marianne began, her voice still measured, "I understand you're doing your job, but no, I don't think you do understand." His patience visibly thinning, Elliot gestured toward her clothing. "This is the Grand Meridian. We maintain certain standards of appearance and conduct." Marianne felt her cheeks burn, not from embarrassment, but from a slow-building anger. She'd spent the day helping people who couldn't afford their next meal, while this man judged her for not wearing designer labels. "Are you seriously judging me based on my clothes?" "I'm enforcing our policies. This isn't a public space." He straightened his already perfect tie. "Now, I've asked nicely. Please leave before I'm forced to call security." The older female employee finally stepped forward. "Mr. Winchester, I think—" "That will be all, Mrs. Davis." He cut her off, without taking his eyes off Marianne. Marianne stood her ground, acutely aware of the stares. She could end this immediately by revealing her identity, but something in her refused to give this man the satisfaction. "Fine," Elliot snapped, reaching for his radio. "Security to the main lobby, please." A security guard approached, looking uncomfortable. Elliot gestured toward Marianne. "Please escort this person from the premises." "Sir, are you sure?" the guard began. "Now," Elliot commanded. Marianne locked eyes with the manager. "You're making a mistake." Elliot smiled thinly. "The mistake was yours, thinking you could walk in here like this. Not welcome here?" The security guard approached Marianne reluctantly, his discomfort evident. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." "This is ridiculous," Marianne said, her voice rising just enough to be heard by the growing audience of onlookers. "I have every right to be here." Elliot Winchester stepped closer, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. "Look, I don't know what your angle is. Looking for a wealthy patron, trying to sneak into our event, or just seeking attention. But it won't work." Marianne felt a flash of indignation. After years in the public eye, she'd developed thick skin against prejudice and assumptions. But this was blatant even by those standards. "My angle? I told you, I'm waiting for my husband." Elliot's laugh was short and dismissive. "Right, and I suppose your husband is one of our distinguished guests for the Global Reform Initiative?" "Actually, yes." Marianne stood taller, though still several inches shorter than the manager. "He is." This only seemed to amuse Elliot further. He turned to the security guard with an exaggerated eye roll. "Of course he is." By now, several hotel guests had abandoned any pretense of not watching. Some looked embarrassed, others entertained by the drama unfolding in the luxurious lobby. A few staff members exchanged concerned glances. Mrs. Davis, the older employee, tried once more. "Mr. Winchester, perhaps we should—" "Margaret, I've told you to return to your post," Elliot snapped. "I'll handle this." The security guard shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, maybe we could verify—" "There's nothing to verify," Elliot cut him off. "The situation is clear." He turned back to Marianne, his patience visibly exhausted. "This is your final warning. Leave quietly or be escorted out." A flash went off, someone taking a photo with their phone. Marianne felt her cheeks flush at being made a spectacle, but her resolve hardened. "I'm not leaving until my husband arrives," she stated firmly. "Fine. Have it your way." Elliot nodded to the guard. "Remove her." The guard reached hesitantly for Marianne's arm, clearly conflicted about his role in this increasingly uncomfortable scene. "Don't touch me," Marianne said quietly but firmly. "I'll walk myself out." Her dignity in that moment was palpable. She straightened her shoulders and turned toward the door, determined not to give Elliot the satisfaction of seeing her distressed. Just as she took the first step, the massive glass doors of the Grand Meridian swung open. The lobby fell silent. Franklin Lawrence stood framed in the entrance, commanding attention without effort. At 48, his distinguished features were instantly recognizable to most in the room. His tailored suit and confident bearing marked him as someone of significance even to those who didn't know his name. Behind him, 2 assistants and a security detail paused respectfully as he surveyed the scene before him. His eyes found Marianne immediately, his expression shifting from pleasant anticipation to concern. The atmosphere in the lobby transformed instantly. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Several guests straightened their posture. Staff members who had been watching the confrontation suddenly found urgent tasks elsewhere. Elliot Winchester hadn't yet noticed the new arrival, still focused on Marianne with a satisfied smirk. "That's right, the exit is that way." The security guard, however, had gone pale, his eyes darting between Marianne and the man who had just entered. He quickly stepped back, removing his hand from her vicinity. Marianne stood still, watching the recognition dawn across the room. Franklin Lawrence's presence commanded the room, his measured footsteps echoing on the marble floor as conversations hushed. He moved with the confident ease of someone accustomed to attention, yet there was nothing showy about his demeanor. "Marianne," he called, his deep voice carrying across the lobby. Elliot Winchester froze mid-gesture, the shift in the room's atmosphere finally registering. He turned slowly, his expression morphing from irritation to confusion, as he watched the distinguished guest stride directly toward the woman he'd just been trying to remove. "Franklin," Marianne replied, her voice steady despite the tension of the past few minutes. The shock rippled visibly through Elliot's body. His eyes widened, his mouth opening slightly as the pieces clicked into place. Franklin Lawrence, the Franklin Lawrence, was heading straight for the woman in the baseball cap and sweatshirt. "I'm so sorry I'm late," Franklin said, reaching Marianne and gently taking her hands in his. His eyes scanned her face, immediately sensing something was wrong. "Is everything all right?" Before she could answer, people began to approach. The hotel's general manager materialized seemingly from nowhere, his face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Lawrence, what an honor to welcome you to the Grand Meridian. We've been expecting you." He extended his hand enthusiastically. Franklin acknowledged him with a brief nod, but kept his attention on Marianne. "What's happening here?" he asked her quietly. Elliot Winchester stood frozen, the color draining from his face. The security guard had already retreated to a discreet distance, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on the marble floor. "Your wife was just—" Elliot began, his voice faltering. Marianne met Franklin's questioning gaze. "The hotel manager was concerned about my presence in the lobby," she said simply. "He was in the process of having me removed when you arrived." Franklin's expression hardened almost imperceptibly, though his voice remained measured. "I see." The general manager's smile wavered. "There must be some misunderstanding." He shot a pointed look at Elliot, who seemed to have lost the ability to speak. "Mr. Winchester is relatively new to our staff." "Not that new," Marianne remarked quietly. Franklin turned his full attention to Elliot, who finally found his voice. "Mr. Lawrence, I had no idea. I mean, certainly if I'd known," he stammered, adjusting his tie nervously. "If you'd known she was my wife, you would have treated her differently." Franklin's question hung in the air, his tone deceptively conversational. Mrs. Davis, the older employee who had attempted to intervene earlier, stepped forward. "Sir, I tried to tell Mr. Winchester that Mrs. Lawrence was a valued guest, but he wouldn't listen." Elliot shot her a venomous glare, which she pointedly ignored. By now, a small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance, watching the drama unfold. Whispers circulated as hotel guests and staff recognized not just Franklin, but also Marianne Lawrence, known for her extensive charitable work and advocacy alongside her husband's political career. "Tell me exactly what happened," Franklin said to no one in particular, his gaze moving between Marianne, Elliot, and the staff members nearby. Mrs. Davis spoke up again. "Mr. Winchester insisted that Mrs. Lawrence leave because of her attire. He implied she didn't belong here and threatened to have security remove her." Elliot's face flushed red. "That's not exactly. I was merely enforcing our standards." "Standards?" Franklin repeated, his eyebrow raised. "What standards would those be, Mr. Winchester?" "We have an image to maintain," Elliot insisted, though his voice had lost its earlier authority. "Especially with today's event. How was I to know this woman was your wife?" "This woman," Franklin said slowly, "is Marianne Lawrence. But more importantly, she's a person deserving of basic respect, regardless of who she's married to or what she's wearing." The general manager nodded vigorously. "Absolutely, Mr. Lawrence. The Grand Meridian values all our guests equally." He turned to Elliot, his expression thunderous, despite his forced smile. "Mr. Winchester and I will be having a lengthy discussion about our customer service policies." Franklin's attention returned to Marianne. Are you all right? She nodded, squeezing his hand. I'm fine. Just ready to go upstairs and change before dinner. Of course, he said, then addressed the general manager. I trust our suite is ready? Yes, absolutely. The presidential suite has been prepared exactly to your specifications. He gestured toward the elevators. Please, allow me to escort you personally. As the couple moved toward the elevators, Elliot Winchester remained rooted to the spot, his career flashing before his eyes. The presidential suite of the Grand Meridian occupied the entire top floor, offering breathtaking views through floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, Marianne sat on the edge of a plush sofa, still in her work clothes, as Franklin loosened his tie. You should have called me, he said, concern evident in his voice. Marianne smiled ruefully. And say what? Your wife is being thrown out of the hotel because she looks too ordinary. Exactly that. Franklin sat beside her, taking her hand. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. And it won't be the last, she sighed. People see what they expect to see. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Franklin opened it to find the hotel's general manager, Marcus Bennett, looking deeply apologetic. Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence, I cannot express how deeply sorry we are for the incident downstairs. His distress appeared genuine. This is not representative of the Grand Meridian's values. Yet it happened, Franklin pointed out. Yes, sir. Marcus nodded gravely. I wanted to personally assure you that we're addressing it. Mr. Winchester has been suspended pending a full review of the incident. Marianne stood up. Is that really necessary? He made a mistake. Both men looked at her in surprise. A mistake born from prejudice, Franklin noted. Yes, she agreed, but firing him won't change that prejudice. It just moves it somewhere else. Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mrs. Lawrence, what he did was inexcusable. I'm not excusing it, Marianne clarified, but perhaps there's a more constructive response. Meanwhile, 5 floors below, Elliot Winchester sat in a small office, his career imploding around him. 20 years of climbing the hospitality ladder, potentially ruined in 15 minutes. He buried his face in his hands. A soft knock made him look up. Mrs. Davis stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Come to gloat? He asked bitterly. No. She entered, closing the door behind her. I came to tell you that you still have a chance to make this right. Elliot laughed humorlessly. Right? I just insulted Franklin Lawrence's wife. There's no coming back from that. Maybe not with that attitude, she replied sharply. You know, I've worked here for 15 years. I've seen Mrs. Lawrence dozens of times. She remembers my name, asks about my grandchildren. How was I supposed to know who she was? Elliot demanded. Mrs. Davis fixed him with a stern look. That's exactly the point. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with dignity. Back in the presidential suite, Marianne had changed into an elegant black dress, preparing for the evening's formal dinner. Franklin watched her with admiration. You're too forgiving, he said, as she fastened a simple pearl necklace. It's not about forgiveness, she replied, meeting his eyes in the mirror. It's about making a difference. What would firing Elliot Winchester accomplish? He'd just take his attitudes to another hotel. And what do you suggest instead? A smile touched her lips. I have an idea. The charity gala dinner was in full swing in the Grand Meridian's ballroom. Hundreds of influential guests mingled among tables adorned with elaborate centerpieces. At the head table, Franklin and Marianne Lawrence greeted a constant stream of admirers and colleagues. Near the service entrance, Elliot Winchester stood in nervous anticipation, summoned unexpectedly from his office where he'd been clearing his desk. He adjusted his tie repeatedly, unsure why he'd been called to the ballroom rather than simply being escorted from the premises. Mrs. Davis appeared beside him. They're ready for you. Who is? He asked, his voice strained. The Lawrences. Elliot felt a rush of nausea. They want to humiliate me publicly? Just go, she said, giving him a gentle push forward. Heart pounding, Elliot approached the head table. Conversations quieted as people noticed his approach. Franklin Lawrence looked up, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Marianne Lawrence watched with calm eyes. Mr. Winchester, Franklin acknowledged him. My wife has a proposition for you. Marianne turned to face him fully. Mr. Winchester, I understand you've been suspended. Elliot swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. How would you feel about taking on a special assignment instead? The community center where Mary Ann volunteered was a world away from the Grand Meridian's opulence. Located in a struggling neighborhood, the brick building served as a lifeline for many families. 1 week after the incident at the hotel, Elliot Winchester stood in its modest kitchen, sleeves rolled up, an apron protecting his still immaculate clothes. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead as he portioned out vegetable stew into serving containers. Across the kitchen, Mary Ann worked efficiently, organizing meal deliveries. She glanced over at Elliot, noting his meticulous attention to detail even in this humble task. How are you holding up? She asked, approaching his workstation. Fine, he replied, somewhat stiffly. The kitchen could use better organization, though. I've been thinking about ways to improve efficiency. Mary Ann smiled. Always the manager. Elliot looked up, suddenly self-conscious. I didn't mean... I'm grateful for this opportunity, Mrs. Lawrence. Mary Ann, she corrected him. And this isn't charity, Elliot. You're earning your second chance. The arrangement had been straightforward. Instead of dismissal, Elliot would spend 1 month working at the community center while continuing his hotel duties. The experience would conclude with him overseeing a charity fundraiser at the Grand Meridian, with all proceeds benefiting the center. May I ask you something? Elliot ventured, still carefully measuring portions. Of course. Why did you do this? After how I treated you, most people would have demanded my firing. Mary Ann considered his question. What would that have accomplished? You'd have lost your job, but would you have learned anything? Elliot had no answer. I've spent my life trying to bridge divides, she continued. Sometimes the only way to change perspectives is through experience. Outside the kitchen, the center's director, Elena, approached with a clipboard. Mary Ann, we've got 15 more families than expected today. We'll make it work, Mary Ann assured her. Elliot, can you help us rethink the distribution plan? For the first time that day, Elliot smiled genuinely. Actually, I have some ideas. By late afternoon, the center had successfully served over 200 families. Elliot stood by the door, handing out meal packages and making notes on his phone. What are you writing? Mary Ann asked as she joined him. Ideas for the fundraiser, he replied. I'm thinking about ways to get the hotel's regular guests invested in the center's mission. Mary Ann studied him thoughtfully. You know, you're quite good at this when you're not busy judging people. Elliot had the grace to look embarrassed. I deserve that. No, she said. What you deserve is the chance to do better. We all do. 1 month later, the Grand Meridian's ballroom was transformed for the community center fundraiser. Elliot Winchester, reinstated as hotel manager, personally greeted each guest, from wealthy donors to community center volunteers, all treated with equal respect. As Franklin Lawrence took the stage to make his speech, he gestured to his wife standing nearby. The true measure of our society isn't how we treat those we admire or fear, but how we treat those we think can do nothing for us. Across the room, Elliot caught Mary Ann's eye and nodded in acknowledgement of the lesson he had learned. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with a simple shift in perspective. If this story touched you, remember that true character isn't revealed in how we treat the powerful, but in how we treat everyone else. Share where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that remind us what really matters in life.